A certain point in discernment, you could ask God to send you a sign. So I said, okay, God, if I'm going to go into seminary, send me a dove, send me a dove.
Three things that you think that would help people start walking towards their vocation.
The call to celibacy was an invitation from the Lord. It was the Lord inviting me to love people the way his son loved people.
Is it true that we can find that vocation through the talents and gifts that the Lord has given us?
The church does say that there are more perfect forms of life, objectively speaking.
Welcome, everyone. This is Lifting the Veil. My name is Juanes, and I have a very special guest, Father David Michael Moses. Just for those that don't know anything about this YouTube channel, the whole point of it, the definition of it is lifting the veil, revealing what is hidden, revealing the truth about ourselves, about the world that we live in, about vocation, which is our topic. So that's why we're very excited to have Father David Michael Moses today. He's the second priest invited to talk in this YouTube channel. So, Father, thank you so much for joining us. Could you please kind of introduce yourself, share a little bit about your testimony, your conversion story, and how did you decided to, that the calling that the Lord had for you was becoming a priest?
For sure. Well, first, just thanks for having me. Been looking forward to this. Appreciate what you're doing and the opportunity to come speak with you today. So for me, I'm Father David Michael Moses. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a priest here in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, of 3 years. And I grew up here in Houston and was an altar server growing up, which was a big part of, my spiritual journey, being close to the Eucharist, being close to the priesthood at the Mass. But I really didn't think too much about priesthood until I went on a silent retreat when I was 16, and just kind of praying during that retreat in the silence. I really felt the Lord saying, "It might be you. It might be you. I'm calling to be a priest." And at one point in the retreat, the priest had said, "You should choose the vocation that will make you a saint." And that hit me like, oh, well, that's priesthood. But I didn't really know why I thought that. So I remember talking to the priest on the retreat, and I just said, hey, I'm kind of feeling drawn to the priesthood, but I really like girls, and I don't know what to do about that. And he said, hey, that's totally normal. That's fine. But God still might be calling you, and you have to take that seriously. So after that, started going to Mass every day, going to adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, praying the Rosary, and really just fell in love with how a priest could help people. I always thought, what more could I do for somebody than literally give them Jesus in the Eucharist and literally forgive their sins in the person of Christ in confession. But the girl thing definitely didn't go away. The discernment of celibacy was tough. Remember at one point I was driving downtown to meet with the vocations director, and I was feeling just very anxious about discernment, about celibacy. And I read that at a certain point in discernment, you could ask God to send you a sign. So I said, okay, God, if I'm going to go into seminary, send me a dove, send me a dove. So I'm driving on the highway, and I see some birds. I'm not really sure if they're doves, and I realize I don't really know what a dove looks like, in the wild. I really should have been more specific. So I spent the next couple of months really pausing the application process for seminary and looking at some other options. But finally, I was praying at a holy hour at my home parish in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and was really feeling drawn to the priesthood again. But wanted to make sure that it was what God wanted. And so I remember telling God, hey, I want to do what you want. Just let me know what that is. If you want me to go into seminary, send me a dove, send me a dove. And right then I looked up and realized that the huge painted glass window above the altar of the church was a giant dove as a symbol of the Holy Spirit. So things became pretty clear for me at that moment. Into the seminary, I went through for 7 years, and been a priest now for 3 years, and absolutely love it.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Father. Well, that's a beautiful story. I had the opportunity to listen to it, but it's awesome to share with the viewers, with the listeners, whoever's watching us. We have a different variety of audience: believers, non-believers, Catholics, Protestants, and we just want to share with everyone the truth and reveal the truth. So today, the topic is vocation. That's, I think, is very appropriate for you to share that story. So I wanted to ask you the second question: what is kind of the hardest thing or the hardest aspect of being a priest, and what is one of the coolest aspects of being a priest now that you have accepted that calling that the Lord had very clear?
Yeah, so for me, the hardest part, at least of discernment, like just seeing if it's what the Lord wanted for me, if that was priesthood, it was definitely celibacy. So, as a 16, 17-year-old guy, even now at 29, the idea of never getting married sounds kind of insane, sounds crazy. Yeah. And yet over time, as I really prayed through it, I realized celibacy, the call to celibacy, was an invitation from the Lord. It wasn't him oppressing me with anything, or beating me down with rules or making me a slave of something. It was the Lord inviting me to love people the way his son loved people, because Jesus was celibate, right? And to be called to conformity with Jesus, which is what the heart of the priesthood is also to be called to love in a celibate way, to let go of one hand to hold many in a sense. And the second part of it, Jesus says celibacy, you choose it for the sake of the kingdom. That for a young man or a young woman to choose a celibate life, especially in today's culture, is radical. It causes people to stop and say, wait, like, what is this guy living for? Because if he's not getting married here, right, he must not be living for this life. And the truth is, like, as a priest, I'm not living for this life. I'm living for another life, another world, the kingdom. And that's what celibacy points to. So it becomes, in that sense, a really beautiful gift to be united with Christ, to love as he loves, and to be a sign to the world of where I'm putting my value, like where my treasure is. And so even though celibacy is hard, I'm really grateful for it, because it makes me a better priest and it makes me a better man and a better disciple. That's in terms of discernment. In terms of day-to-day stuff as a priest, I think the hardest thing is just time. The last parish I was at, there were 2 priests and about 15,000 parishioners. So with confessions, with the masses, with funerals and weddings and baptisms, it was pretty much nonstop. And also you need to hang out with your friends sometimes, so you're trying to balance everything. And so that can be kind of challenging, but you give your time to the Lord, and he gets you where you need to be. I would say the coolest part of being a priest, I mean, the best part objectively is definitely offering the sacrifice of the Mass, in the person of Jesus Christ. I mean, the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith as Catholics. I also personally just love hearing confessions. That's hard as well, but it's so meaningful to see people who have been away from the sacrament for a long time come back, and they walk in that confessional with sin, and they walk out of it without sin. And to be in the middle there of that moment of grace is really extraordinary. But on a basic level for me too, one of the best parts of being a priest is just being called father. I showed up as a 25-year-old in my parish and everybody called me father, and that is a deep relationship to have. Someone to be a spiritual father for them is pretty unreal. So I tell the story of a time I was at a gym, and I was wearing plain clothes because I was working out. So I almost always wear my collar, but when I'm at the gym, I don't want to get this all sweaty. Yeah. So this middle-aged guy walked up to me and he said, hey, are you using that machine? And I said, no, I'm not. And go ahead. And he said, wait. And he got a confused look and he said, wait, father? And I was like, son? No, I didn't say that. And I didn't say that. But it was a funny moment in the gym there with this middle-aged guy and this 25-year-old, and he's calling him father, and so that's just, for me, is definitely one of the coolest parts of being a priest.
That's awesome. That's beautiful to hear, because for me, it's like, gives me so much energy, so much I don't know, desire to continue to search into my discernment, because I am discerning my vocation, whether it's matrimony, single life, or priesthood, or different other vocations that there are. But it gives me so much hope. See a young priest with so much passion and with so much clarity in why do you do it. I think that's a lot of times people don't know what their vocation is, whether it's for matrimony. They don't even know why they were called to be in matrimony, right? Like you were saying, I'm living for another life, which is, again, this is something that we preach constantly in this channel, is we live in this world, we live in this life, but we're kind of like moving forward. We're moving towards something bigger, something much more beautiful, much more perfect, and it is that eternal life that has been promised to us. But it is super important for us to understand what's that vocation, what's that calling that the Lord has for each one of us, because there is a calling for each one of us. And what you said about confession, to be honest with you, I'm fairly new to the Catholic Church in a sense. 2018 is when I did my first confession. It was amazing. It is one of the biggest attractions that I have towards priesthood, is definitely the sacrament. But confession to me, when I first had that experience of really understanding and feeling the love of God through a priest, and feeling that my sins were forgiven, that's something that really attracts me towards priesthood, just to kind of share with you a little bit of that. So
I understand why. I understand why. And there's a huge need.
yes, sir. So in terms of that vocation, I would like to ask you, what would be the definition of vocation, and how can we help people, understand and start approaching or learning more about what's the calling of the Lord towards their life?
Yes, the term vocation is generally understood to mean, it come from the Latin vocare, which means to call, right? That we're called in some way by the Lord. And listeners might be familiar with the fact that we all have a primary and a first vocation to holiness, to be saints, right? To be sons and daughters of God. But how we live that out will often take shape as either a married person or some kind of religious life. Some people stay single, which is kind of a different way of living it out, which can certainly be God's will for you as well. And then we all have often another vocational kind of ministry in terms of many people in terms of career, right? You might be an engineer or a doctor or something else. So there's different tiers to this. We don't need to discern if we're called to holiness or not. We know that, but we do need to discern if we're called to priesthood or religious life or something along that path. We need to, because these are all good things, right? So we need to take time to kind of choose which one we think the Lord wants for us. And on that, I guess I would say in more in easier terms, your vocation is how you're called to love. Vocation is how you're called to love others, how you're loved by God, and how you're loving others ultimately.
That's awesome. I love that definition. And like you said, from the Greek, I love when priests and people that study words define a word by the meaning, by the origin of it, because it gives you a whole dimension of what it is. So going along those lines, there's something that I've always been not confused, but since I decided to join the Catholic Church with the sacraments and everything and did some research, I often felt that some people think that the vocation for priesthood is more important than others, or that matrimony is more important than others, but my question would be, the vocation towards priesthood, does it have the same value, or does it have more value than a vocation for a lay person? I know it might be an ignorant question, but a lot of people do think that there's more value to become a priest, or more value to be married than single, so just wanted to ask you that question.
Yeah. So I want to be careful what terms we use. I mean, I wouldn't say one has more value and one's certainly not more important than the other, right? I mean, the Lord, again, this is how the Lord wants to make us holy and how he wants us to love. So for each of us, it's about making sure that we choose the right vocation, right? And that the Lord needs you to do whatever he's called you to do, and that's extremely important for the world, whatever that looks like. One thing that people might find helpful is the church does say that there are more perfect forms of life, objectively speaking. So religious life, where let's say there's a sister who's praying pretty consistently throughout the day, and she's not with people a lot, she's not talking a lot. We would say that's a more perfect form of life because that way of life lends itself toward a deeper communion with God. She's less distracted by the world, right?
Yeah.
It's more perfect than my life. And, my life, I'm very much with people. I'm doing this with you right now. I have to make sure that I'm going into prayer in a deep way, and then also with people in the world doing stuff. We had basketball practice with the priest this morning. It's a less perfect form of life. It's not less good for me. It's what the Lord has called me to, but in itself, it's less perfect because I can more easily distracted. And the same way we would say married life is less perfect, objectively speaking, than priesthood, because you need to now be very focused on your marriage, on your kids. St. Paul talks about this. He says a married man is worried about his wife and his kids, and an unmarried man is worried about the things of God, right? So objectively speaking, there are more perfect forms of life, but for us each individually, the most perfect form of life is going to be what the Lord calls us to. So if someone wants to become a religious sister because it's objectively more perfect, that would be disordered if the Lord's really calling them to marriage, right? And if they're going to achieve holiness in a really radical way through whatever their vocation is. So I want to be careful what terms we use, but at the end of the day, they are all needed, and we need to choose the one that the Lord's calling us to.
I love it. I've never seen it that way, and I think it clarifies a lot of it. I think you just said it perfectly, so I'm not going to add anything to that. So, in terms of that, going along those lines, how can we help Catholics or non-Catholics to discern and find that vocation? What would you recommend them do?
Yeah. So the first thing always is to be a disciple, right? To follow Jesus. Today's gospel at Mass is Jesus calling Levi and saying, "Come follow me," and that is the starting point of Christianity is following Jesus. That's always the best thing we can do. Because if we're really getting closer to Jesus, that's going to bring us closer to our vocation ultimately, right? So that's the main focus. But in terms of discernment, the root of that is always going to be in prayer, right? Conversation with the Lord. Um, and then from there, I would say making sure we're going to the correct resources, talking to the right people, and then looking at the need too. I think it's worth asking, where is there a need in the world right now, right? Because where I see there being a need it might reveal in my heart what the Lord's doing. And objectively speaking, some young men look at the world and say, like I did, like, man, we need more good priests, right? And some people look at the world correctly and say we need more good biological fathers and families, and they choose that. So is there like a wrong answer between those two? No, there's not really a wrong. The world needs both, right? If there was nobody, this kind of goes back to the last question. If there were no parishioners at my church, me being a priest, what would be the point of that? If nobody came to confession, no one came to mass. But if it was just a bunch of lay people and no priests, that would be a really sad church too. And so we really need both. But where a young man or woman sees the need in the world themselves is often revealing in their heart what the Lord is speaking. So I think that can be extremely helpful.
That's awesome. That is very helpful and helpful for me because I am in that process of discerning my vocation. So
Good.
thank you so much for that. And then I guess the next question is just someone that arose to my mind when I was thinking the questions to ask you. But I have heard it before, and is it true that we can find that vocation through the talents and gifts that the Lord has given us? Like, for example, some people are very talented with their music, or some people are very good at listening. Some people are very good at giving advice. So is there any connection amongst those things, or you think maybe not?
Oh, I think for sure there is. I mean, um, one thing I think another way of saying it is like when the Lord calls you, right? He's not just calling a random person he found, he's calling a person he created for that thing. So it's not as though God calls you in the abstract as a 29-year-old to something. He calls you from the time that you were conceived, right? And so he probably was giving you everything that he wanted you to have to get you there. So following Jesus usually doesn't mean giving up everything about you that's good. It usually just means taking everything about you that's good and putting it at the service of the Lord and of others. I remember, a story in similar. There was a friend of mine. He was ordained a priest with me. Sadly, he passed away from cancer last year. But he was a good man. And there was one week I was planning to do this. It's a benefit concert that we do here in Houston. And I knew he played drums, and I said, "Hey man, would you want to play drums, for the concert?" And he said, "Wow, man, this week I was just planning to sell my drums online because I thought I'm never going to play these again." And then you asked me to, play in this show, and then we ended up playing a lot of different shows together, and it was a moment when I think both of us kind of realized, like, no, the things that the Lord has given us, he wants to use those things. He really wants them to blossom. Whether that's playing the drums, or like you said, maybe you're really good at speaking with people about things, or maybe you're very good with kids, so that could say something about your life as a parent. But I do think we don't want to get too caught up in just everything we desire, because ultimately there are moments when the Lord does call us to sacrifice. So like in today's gospel, Levi, he leaves behind his old life, right? He doesn't leave behind his skills and everything, but he leaves behind his will for his life, right? He leaves behind maybe his dreams even, to put him at the service of the Lord. And that is what we're called to do. Yeah, we're going to take our gifts and our talents with us, but we do need to leave behind our own will and really submit that to God, knowing that what he wants for us is ultimately going to be best.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm going to ask a question that wasn't in here because it just comes up to my mind if you're okay with it. But recently, I did a short video about the new life. The new life we talked about the kerygma, 4 steps of the kerygma. God loves you. You've sinned. You walked away from Him. He loves you. He comes and dies for you, and then He offers you a new life. So I did a short video about it. In lifting the veil, we do several things with my family. We pray every morning at 4:30 a.m. in the morning. We do liturgy of the hours. It's a sacrifice. Then I go back to bed and then hit the gym. But we do certain things. So we're proposing 7 things that we do. Not everyone has to do those things, but like you were saying in the new life, there's certain things you have to leave behind. Doesn't mean that your talents are leaving behind, but there's certain habits, certain things that you used to do that maybe were not very good for you, or maybe they were okay, but you need to kind of leave behind. So in a sense, for people to know, because you just said it, you can't be caught up in like all your desires, and you can't go to the other extreme and be like, well, everything's bad and now I have to do everything different. Yeah. How do we find like a balance, and how do someone that is watching this video and is going through a conversion moment, how can he have a balance? Because I do remember myself, I'm a very going to the extremes. So when I started my conversion, I was like, okay, so I'm never going out again, never going to drink a beer. Well, no, because you still have to go and meet people where they're at. Your friends, my friends, I still have friends that I love, and that I can't be like, well, let's go meet and do a Bible study right away. They're not going to accept that invitation. I may want to meet them at a pub, whatever, get a beer, eat a hamburger. And maybe in that situation, if I do pray a lot, maybe I can have a meaningful conversation. But it took me like 2 years to realize, okay, I can't be extreme. So yeah, what would you say to those, to the
Well, I think one, it's very natural, I think, to go back and forth there, right? I think to have moments when we're maybe on this extreme or on this extreme. And really, like, the greatest model is the life of Jesus. I mean, it's extraordinary that this man was God. He was perfect. He was set apart. He was different than everybody else. And yet he was with everyone. You know, today's gospel, again, he's at this dinner with tax collectors and sinners. He's hanging out, he's eating with them, he's drinking wine, he's talking, I'm sure they were laughing and telling jokes, you know. He goes to the wedding feast at Cana and he stays late. He stays late at the wedding until they run out of wine. He wasn't just there for 10 minutes to wave, say hi, say the blessing, and then leave. You know, he was there. He was really with people. He goes to visit Lazarus and Martha and Mary, just to go visit his friends, right? And I think that's the model for us. And I think to that point, this is good to, I think, mention with vocation, is that the church has given us some pretty specific things we have to do. We have to go to mass on Sunday, right? We need to be praying every day. We need to make a regular confession. We need to be avoiding sin, you know, don't commit adultery. We have specific commandments. But outside of that, the world is good. Creation is really good. You know, having a good lunch with your friends is good. There are so many good things in the world that the Lord does give you freedom. He delights in our freedom to choose, you know, what we do with it. And so I think when you look at the world, kind of, we're talking about gifts and all that stuff, those things can either be used for great evil by the devil, or great good by God. And we're kind of in the middle, deciding how we spend that lunch with a friend. Is that lunch with a friend a time when we're gossiping and making bad comments, wasting time? Or is it a moment really of joy and connection, you know? And so everybody has to kind of discern that in their own way. And it's definitely hard, but I think it's hard to figure out that line, but finding that line is exactly what it means to become a saint. Finding that line is holiness, and that is Christ likeness. So it's worth the energy and worth the conversations like we're having right now to find where that is for each of us.
That's awesome. That is beautiful. I love it. So final question that I had for you, just to leave people with, I love when we do like very simple and very systematic things for people to analyze or think about. Just 3 things that you think would help people that would help people start walking towards their vocation, or walking towards that discernment and starting really approaching, I guess, a good, you know, clear path towards that. So what would be 3 things that you would recommend people to do?
Yeah, well, actually, I have a pretty clear system I like to use. I came up with prayer, people, peace. Prayer, people, peace. So prayer, make sure you're praying, talking to God. And people often pray real quick and want quick answers. That's not the point of the prayer initially. you're just trying to spend time with the Lord. And what you're often doing is softening your heart in prayer so that when the Lord speaks to you, you hear it, right? That's really important. We're not looking for prayer to be really efficient and super productive, in that sense. We want it to be spending time with the Lord. So pray about it. And then people, go talk to somebody. Go talk to somebody you trust. Talk to your parents. Hey, mom and dad, what do you think about me becoming a priest? What would you guys think about that? Talk to your best friend. Hey, how do you kind of see me with marriage? What do you think of that this girl that I'm dating? Do you like her? What do you think? Do you think we mesh? Talk to your priest about things. So prayer, and then people, and then peace. What brings you peace? And peace is not feeling really happy and excited. That's not what peace is. That's not always a good sign of the Holy Spirit that we're really excited. It can be, but it isn't a sure sign. Peace is everything being as it should be in your heart. Peace is everything being well ordered. So we can be very excited about something and really not have much peace about it. And we can be going through something very, very hard and have a lot of peace. Jesus on the cross was being crucified. It was extremely painful and uncomfortable. And yet he had supreme peace about that. So peace is what you're looking for. And then whatever you're feeling, whether it's peace or it's not peace, take it back to prayer. And if you cycle through those three things, prayer, people, peace, prayer, people, peace, I think you're putting yourself in a really good place for the Lord to speak to you and get you where he wants you to be.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect way of ending this awesome conversation. I truly appreciate your time, your dedication, your passion. I want to thank you because we do need more priests like that. I have been very blessed to meet a lot of young priests now lately in the States. I just recently this morning interviewed Father Clay, who was my father from my parish in Kansas, where I was living while I was studying. And we talked about suffering, which was kind of cool because we talked about how we can suffer and also have joy, and through suffering encounter a more close relationship with the Lord. So that would be another topic to talk later on. But I wanted to thank you so much. This means a lot. And just to add, I always try to mention this towards the end of the video. If the people that watch this video liked it, please make sure to like it, to subscribe. The point of this YouTube channel is not to become famous. We want to reach a lot of people because we want to share the gospel and we want to reveal the truth about vocation, about priesthood, about life. We share songs. So if you like music, we're trying to develop more songs, covers, and also our own. I know you sing, and I heard one of your songs, which was beautiful. I shared with my sister this morning. She loved it. I think what was it that if you're a sinner, we need
room for you. Yeah.
Very beautiful song. I really liked it. Very catchy. And I think you have many gifts, like you were saying. And if we can use those gifts towards the Lord, it's just beautiful because you have inspired me anyways. And I wanted to thank you for that, Father.
Hey, well, thank you for that encouragement. Thanks for what you're doing. I'll definitely be praying for you and your discernment.
Thank you, Father.
Hi! If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, ring the bell, and share with your friends. Bye!